And to me, the gold backing is inevitable. And if you realize that after the Basel III regulations and metal that is held, directly held, that is not paper, if it is physically held, it is tier one. It is as good as.
Andy Schectman discusses the possibility of the BRICS trade currency being backed by gold or commodities and its implications. He highlights Saudi Arabia's strategic alignments and suggests a potential coalition of nations challenging the US dollar's dominance in trade settlements. Schectman also addresses social and political concerns within the US, emphasizing a broader trend that could impact the dollar's global status. Keep watching this informative and important discussion of Andy Schectman till the end.
I think the probability of the BRICS trade currency ultimately being used, or rather backed by gold or commodities, as we've heard for a long time now, is legit. Whether or not it comes out August 22nd at the meeting in Johannesburg is another question altogether. But he said some other things in his writing that to me are even more significant than that. But I want to take a step back for one moment and simply say that to only look at the BRICS and their gold-backed currency as a game changer, I think is only telling half the story. It's missing the other half. And the other half is what Saudi Arabia has been quietly doing over the last several years. Just to rehash, and this has been what I have focused on almost exclusively, even more so than the BRICS, which to me was just an extension or an end game in this ultimate global de-dollarization. What I mean by that, look, we told Saudi Arabia when Biden signed the executive order that, hey, we're going green by 2030. We want to be mostly green by 2050, entirely green. Saudi Arabia and all of the OPEC countries are on the Belt Road, 75% of human population. Saudi Arabia joined the BRICS. And Saudi Arabia has recently applied to the new development bank. Saudi Arabia told everyone at Davos that they are open to taking other currencies. I have said repeatedly, what makes the dollar the world reserve? It's the petrodollar status, the protection of the Saudi kingdom, but I missed something, and I'll get to that in a moment. But when Russia signed a joint military cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia the day after we left Afghanistan, to me, that began the exodus for the dollar as being the petro currency. It didn't remove their reserve status, or it won't immediately remove their reserve status because of our bond market. But what it will do if we lose the petro status is dramatically affect the amount of demand for the dollar, which will ultimately lead to the losing of its reserve status. And so let's just follow the progression here. Saudi Arabia is now, as I mentioned, being protected by Russia in a joint military cooperation agreement. And in signing with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which represents in and of itself 60% of all the Eurasian landmass, 40% of global population. So between the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt Road Initiative, and the Eurasian Economic Union, which we'll talk about also, you have north of 80% of the world's population. That will all be settling trade, unilateral trade with other countries outside the dollar. So the decrease in demand for the dollar as the world reserve settlement currency becomes significant. Now, Jim Rickard said a few things. Forget about the fact that he said that they're going to announce the gold backing August 22nd. If they do, great. But he said some other things to me that were even more relevant. He talked about what the BRICS would do to challenge if they really wanted to challenge for reserve, and that would be to develop a bond market. Now, if you go back to World War II, the U.S. built the bond market by citing patriotism. Buy World War II bonds, they said. Well, in this case, the patriotism amongst all of these countries would be break free from the Western hegemony, buy bonds in a commodity or gold-backed currency. That ultimately will come at some point. But that's down the road. What he said to me that was more significant was that they have plans to incorporate. Now, I have mentioned the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union in almost every podcast I have done, but I've never put them all together. The reason I mention them is that there's so much commingling. You got so many of these countries are in all of the organizations. So it just made sense that they're all talking to each other. Well, he believes that they will combine. Now, it's interesting that he says that. At the August meeting, he thinks they will all combine, making a huge coalition. And he thinks that's what needs to be done. And I agree. This is a process whereby the majority of human population is coming together. And when you throw the fact that we are telling Saudi Arabia, we're going green, we don't need you anymore. And yet this coalition of human population represents the majority of every living soul on this planet, and they're not going green. So the pieces are being put into place. And as far as I'm concerned, even if the currency backed by gold is not announced a month from now at this meeting, if they really do coalesce with the Eurasian Economic Union and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you are dealing with literally the majority of human population. And look where Saudi Arabia has positioned themselves, being protected by Russia and China. Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the largest regional military and financial group in the world. It's Chinese army. So you're being protected with the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and Russia itself. In essence, two of the three largest nuclear arsenals in the world. And they are striking deals right now with all of these countries to accept, whether it be rupee or ruble or yuan, for energy. And it's not just that. I mean, you're starting to see countries like France and Mexico breaking free from the West as well. Now, France hasn't done it entirely yet, although they asked to go to the meeting and they were turned down. But look, they did a massive liquid natural gas deal, I think with Oman, and paid in yuan. The point I'm getting at here is that you have a situation where little by little by little by little by little, all of these things are coming together. And to me, the gold backing is inevitable. And if you realize that after the Basel III regulations and metal that is held, directly held, that is not paper, if it is physically held, it is tier one. It is as good as cash. And who's been buying it all? The central banks. It's not the Western central banks. It's them over there. They're buying it all. And they're not going to tell us how much they've accumulated. The numbers aren't real. They've been buying and accumulating and producing more than they've ever told anyone. So you put it all together, the pieces are rapidly being put into place. And one other thing, the part that I missed about what backs the dollar. Yes, it is the petro status. It is the protection of the Saudi kingdom and the pledge of OPEC to price oil in dollars. And that has been the primary driver of the dollar supremacy. But I would argue that not only are we screwing things up outside the border, we're screwing things up inside the border too. And I would argue that we have done more to destroy this country over the last few years than any of our foes like Russia or China could have ever done. Cancel culture and censorship and transgenderism and racism and wealth inequality and climate alarmism, the violence and the protests that made me leave Minneapolis and come to Florida, and the blatant political corruption and the law not being equally administered. And I talk about how people come to this country. Remember when we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance for liberty and justice for all? That's why they come here. A better life and liberty and justice, because there are a lot of governments out there that are a lot worse than ours, where justice and fairness and equality and liberty is something people only dream of. And you turn on the news and watch this stuff that we see going on. I don't care what you think about Trump or how you feel about Biden. This is not red and blue, Democrat, Republican. This is about the fact that it's very difficult, I think, for anyone who is objective to say that the law is being administered equally. And that, to me, is a nail in the coffin, a big nail, because say what you want about the mismanagement of the dollar and our debt burden, which $155 trillion against $5 trillion in assets. Think about that. We're broken insolvent. What backs the dollar? The faith and credit of the US dollar. Well, the credit, we're broken insolvent. And is the faith really there anymore? Do people trust the Justice Department or the FBI the CDC. I don't know. Do they? I think most people don't. I think most people, even those that are a diehard Democrat, have questions about, if they were being honest, about the way this is all going down. And so you put this all together. It does not matter if they come out on the 22nd and say we're backing by gold. What is more relevant to me is if the coalition continues to grow, comprising the majority of population. We see that the central banks continue to massively accumulate gold, and our administration is doing their best job to make the rest of the world, I think, look at us with cross eyes and say, hey, it may not be the bastion of safety and liberty and free trade that it once was. So whether this happens in August or a year from now or whenever the hell it happens, I think the trend is already in motion. I think it's something that would be very difficult to pull out of.
Andy Schectman's analysis offers a thought-provoking perspective on the future of global trade currencies. By delving into the potential backing of the BRICS trade currency with gold or commodities and exploring Saudi Arabia's strategic engagements, he unveils a complex landscape of evolving economic dynamics. Schectman's insights into the possibility of a coalition challenging the US dollar's supremacy and his examination of broader societal issues underscore a multifaceted transformation on the horizon. His observations encourage us to consider the intricate interplay between financial trends, geopolitical shifts, and sociopolitical factors, paving the way for a redefined global economic landscape. If you liked today's video, subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos. Thank you.